Now, sing the children to their program. Do we have any children here today? Okay. We'll sing it anyway. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the love of God surround you everywhere you may go. We'll now have a time of silent meditation, prayer, or just contemplation. The bell will lead us into silence. Our speaker this morning is our own Dr. Matt Foraker, who teaches at Western. He is in institutional research at Western. After earning a bachelor's degree in engineering at Northwestern, he joined IBM in Arizona. He discovered his love for teaching as a graduate student at the University of Arizona, where he earned an MS in mathematics and a PhD in higher education. Matt has taught several courses at Western. His interests include cinema, history, the study of human consciousness, and the worldly adventures of his daughter, Nadia. Matt.
Well, good morning. And I can promise you that I speak with authenticity when I say that it's great to be alive and standing before you. So, like many of you, my life started a spiritual journey at a certain point in my life. In my case, it was senior in high school, and I was lying in bed, and death suddenly became very real and tangible to me, and the fact that I was going to die ceased to be abstract and became something that had a face and features. And that started a spiritual journey that continued for years and years. And you probably know some of the themes. You try the religions that are available nearby. You try the churches nearby. None of those seem to work, or at least didn't in my case. And you end up going east and hearing about a guy named Buddha, and you start hearing about other people in other religions, and you chant and you meditate, and you put your body into all these different contortions, like that's going to somehow have you become enlightened. And you search for it, and you don't get enlightened. Well, my search finally brought me to a man by the name of Gurdjieff. And in reading Gurdjieff, he was praising certain components of literature and criticizing certain parts of literature, and he couldn't say enough positive about the Arabian Nights. And he talked about the Arabian Nights being told by his father, how his father was one of those recognized as gifted in the storytelling. So we're going back to the days of oral traditions. We're going back to the days where stories were told before they could be written down. They go back way before language. They go back earlier than history. We can't even say where some of these stories come from. And that's not just true for the Arabian Nights. That's true for some of the stories like Grimm's fairy tales and other fairy tales that you may have heard of. If you try to find out, well, who wrote this and when was it published, you realize that your question no longer applies because it goes so far back that who wrote it and where it came from can't be answered. And that's the case with a lot of these. And so my weakness here, being somewhat old and technologically challenged, is advancing the slides. So you'll have to bear with me. I will either succeed or not in advancing the slides. We'll just kind of see how this goes. Please be generous if I occur as a complete idiot trying to advance the slides. So I think I went the wrong way. I'm going the wrong way, so. Oh, I'm holding it upside down. There we go. That was not intentional. That was not an intentional joke. That's me being me. It's an authentic act of stupidity. All right, so hopefully I'm holding it right side up now. It was originally known as 1,000 Nights and a Night. It acquired the name Arabian Nights as things became more modern. If we do try to get the history, and there are many scholars that put a lot of effort into trying to get the history, it goes back, but as you try to get where all the stories came from, it ends up reaching much farther than the Middle East. It goes all the way to China, it goes down into Africa, some of it actually goes up into Europe. So we really can't say, oh, they come from here. We can't say that. We don't know. What we do know is, and you can see they put 700 CE here. CE is the same as AD, in case you didn't know, for Common Era. 700 is what they put there, but really around 600, some of the translations started coming out of a collection of stories known as the 1,000 Nights. And they exist inside of a frame story that I'll talk about in just a second. And it consists of many, many stories that are meant to be extremely compelling, and you'll see why they're meant to be extremely compelling. And the context to keep in mind here is this is the kind of a story that a community will gather around, say, a fire or a table or someplace at night. The whole community or a lot of the community will come together to hear a storyteller tell this orally. It has to be interesting. If you want to have the entire community come to listen to you, speak around a fire or speak around a table, Nathaniel Hawthorne's House of the Seven Gables is not a good choice. All right? The Scarlet Letter is not a good choice. All right? These stories are designed to be the kind of stories that the audience gets value from. They can apply it to their own lives. It has meaning. It has significance. It makes a difference to them, and they walk away from the experience having been contributed to. That's what these stories are meant to do, and that's what Gurdjieff was talking about. These are the kinds of stories that actually have something to say, and you'll learn that they do. Oh, and by the way, these are the 1,001 Nights. You guys didn't have any plans for the rest of the day, did you? All right, okay. Now, even though the stories go back way, way far and way, way far away, almost all of them have been translated or morphed as they developed to take place in the Middle East. So a lot of the stories take place in Iraq. Lots of Baghdad in the stories. Also some of the other Iraq cities, Basra, but also Kufa, Damascus in Syria, and then also the Egyptian cities that are kind of close to the Middle East, like Alexandria and Cairo. They show up in those stories as well. But that's the map that pretty much consists of the world. It's known as the Abbasid Caliphate era. I'm not a scholar in that area, so I'm not going to give you the history lesson, but the map that you see there is pretty much capturing where these stories take place. The original stories, and maybe you've heard this and maybe you haven't, but the original stories are pretty spicy. The original stories get quite erotic, and they also get quite violent. I mean, heads get cut off, people get cut in half, people get dismembered, and depending on the particular translation that you read is the level of spiciness. Richard Burton's translation is a very common translation. A lot of people like to read that one, but if you get into the scholarly background with it, you read that his translation is pretty flawed. It's actually wrong in certain areas with what it says. But if you want the spice, you can read Richard Burton. When a guy and a gal get into it, he doesn't spare you details. He lets you know what's doing what to what. That's the nature of Richard Burton. The much more scholarly respected in what I showed you that's on the floor here are the Lyons translation. That is considered to be far more accurate, and they're not quite as spicy as Richard Burton. Actually, nothing is quite as spicy as Richard Burton, but they're not quite as spicy as Richard Burton. And then in particular, a lot of the Arabian Nights, and that's one of the ways you can tell, is if it says Arabian Nights instead of 1,000 Nights and a Night or 1,001 Nights, that tells you that it might be a version for children. Because a lot of the stories readily available themselves to stories for children. You've all heard of Aladdin and the Lamp. Disney made a movie out of it. That tells you that it's pretty much available as a kid's story. So a lot of the Arabian Nights were put in versions that are appropriate for kids, and you can buy Arabian Night books. And some of you, in fact, it's extremely likely that at least a few of you, read some of these as kids. Your parents could have given them to you as kids, and they didn't give you Richard Burton's version. Let's just put it that way. Okay. When you read the Arabian Nights, it is from the Middle East, but I thought it was worth putting in a slide. And there's one story that we'll read, that will cover the city of Brass, that kind of gets at this. But it promotes Islam and it's about Islam, but it's really more. It's kind of a UU-oriented set of stories. They're really more about God. They emphasize God more than they do a particular religion. They do favor Islam. They do use the word Allah to refer to God. Islam is the dominant religion, but they really do acknowledge Christianity, and in particular, they acknowledge Judaism. You're going to hear about Solomon in the story of the City of Brass, and the acknowledgement of Solomon as being extremely powerful and endorsed by the Almighty Supreme Being. So they do acknowledge the Bible, and they acknowledge the Jews as legit and being in touch with the higher power. They just think that Allah came along and made it better, is another way to put it. In the Arabian Nights, it's major fantasy. You're going to see all sorts of different creatures. And by the way, there's spelling differences that you're going to notice. You're going to see genie spelled as jinn or jinni. You're going to see ifrits, ghouls, and you're going to see other spellings. Even Scheherazade, the main character of the whole thing, you'll see Scheherazade spelled like 4 different ways, depending on where you look. So when you see something spelled differently up here, it's just because I'm using a different source than what you're familiar with. Jinni is a genie. There's all sorts of different beings, and they can transform. And we're going to see that today. People transforming into things, things transforming into people, people transforming into animals. Anything can be anything in the fantasy world of the Arabian Nights. So the frame story that sets everything up is you've got a king. This is what sets up the whole Thousand and Night concept. A king gets up in the morning, looks out into his beautiful garden of his palace, and instead of just seeing a beautiful garden, he sees his wife. And he sees his wife taking her clothes off with other people around, which doesn't tend to make a husband particularly happy. Then he sees a bunch of people taking their clothes off, and there is a complete orgy in the garden. His wife is bonking so-and-so, and other people are bonking, and all these people are bonking each other, and he is upset. He's very upset, and he says, this isn't happening to me again. He feels humiliated. So what he decides he's going to do is, well, first of all, he kills everybody in the garden. He's the king. He gets to do that. So he slaughters the whole kit and caboodle. Then after he slaughters all those people, he says, I'm marrying virgins from now on. They haven't been with another man. And after I get them that first night, nobody's ever going to get them. I'm killing them the next day. And so he adopts the practice of marrying virgins and then killing them the next day. And he continues to do this, not stopping. Well, you can imagine the community, after not a whole lot of time, starts to react. It's very dangerous to be a young virgin in this community. You're going to get picked to marry the king, and then you're done. And this continues until the king's right-hand man, I don't think I have it up there. Well, the king's right-hand man says, we're running out of virgins. The only one that's left is my daughter. That's not going to work. And his daughter, Scheherazade, says, Dad, I got this. And he's like, well, I won't say what he said, but he said his version of no, you don't got this. You're not marrying. And she goes, Dad, I have a plan. We're going to stop the killing of virgins. I'm going to put an end to it. I have a plan to do this. I want to marry this king. And she does. And then after she marries the king, she goes to her sister and she says, I want you to be outside our bedchamber. I want you to be outside where we are. And I want you to listen to what we're doing. And when we're done doing you know what, and we're getting ready to go to sleep, I want you to come in and ask me to tell you a story. And the sister follows her instructions. And that night, as they're getting ready to retire, the sister comes in and begs to be told a story. And Scheherazade has a story ready. And she tells a story that's got a cliffhanger. And these stories have cliffhangers, I was going to say to die for, but actually it's the opposite of that. These stories have cliffhangers that leave the king completely hanging, to which she says, but how can this story compare to what I'll tell you tomorrow night if I'm still alive? And the king's, well, I can't kill you now. I have to hear what happens to so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And she does this for 1,000 nights. So something to keep in mind is she's telling this story, and then at the appropriate time, she breaks off the story and says, well, we're out of time, but I could really continue this story tomorrow if I'm still alive. She does this for 1,000 nights, hence giving the title of the set of stories. Okay, there I have what I just said. How can this compare with the story I'll tell tomorrow? All right, now I'm going to cover the themes and some of the key stories that come along with the themes. One major theme of the Arabian Nights is be smart, use your brain, be cunning. In a lot of the stories, you see the protagonist prevail over much more powerful forces using their brain, being smart. One of the most famous of these is the fisherman and the genie. Think genie. If this confuses you, don't be confused. Fisherman and the genie. It's just like Aladdin. Fisherman casting his net into the sea. He catches a copper bottle. He opens the bottle, and out comes this giant genie. And the genie says, I'm going to kill you. Choose your manner of death. And he's a little surprised. He's like, wait a minute, that's not the story I heard. Aren't you supposed to grant me wishes? And the genie's like, for hundreds of years, that's what I thought. For hundreds of years, I was going to grant you wishes, but you took so long. I'm sick of this. I'm killing the SOB. It takes 600 years. to open this bottle. Choose your manner of death. Well, the guy's clever, and for time reasons, I shrink the story. But first the man says, can you fly so high that when you drop me onto the rocks below, I'm crushed from the fall? And the genie says, absolutely, and he flies real high. Can you grow so big that you can just step on me and crush me under your foot? And the genie says, absolutely, and he gets real huge. And then he says, are you so powerful? I'll bet you're not so powerful that you could shrink yourself back down into that bottle. And the genie's pride is at stake. And so the genie shrinks himself down and fits into the bottle, upon which the fisherman immediately seals it and says, you're sealed in the bottle again, dude. Now, you want to get out of this bottle, now you're granting me wishes. And that's the end of the story. And that's the fisherman and the genie being smart and prevailing over a more powerful force using his brain. A very key component of the Arabian Nights is things are not what they seem. There are stories embedded inside of stories, and this can continue to beyond. I mean, you're reading and you're like, whoa, and you start to get confused because there's so many stories inside of stories inside of stories. Inside of stories, somebody will come up and have to tell a story. And then inside of that story, a character will come up that has to tell a story. And sometimes the stories completely change the overall story. And so that's what this is saying. And what it's also saying is when you see something, it might not mean what you think it means. And one of the most famous of these is the Three Apples. The Three Apples is a very famous Arabian Night story. And it's a story where a husband sees something, and based on what he sees, he thinks his wife has been unfaithful. Now, some of you might remember a Western play in Europe written by a guy whose name rhymes with Makespeare. And he's convinced that if his wife doesn't have something, she's been unfaithful to him. And by God, he goes to see her, and he goes, where is it? And she doesn't know, and she can't find it, and she's embarrassed and ashamed that she can't find it. And the fact that she can't find it, he kills her. Now, that was written thousands of years, I think. Certainly written after. How long after? Who knows? The Three Apples. So, things may not mean what you think they mean. You don't see the handkerchief. She's been unfaithful. Not true. And what the Three Apples does is shows this in spades. The stories inside the story can change everything. So, the Three Apples starts when a very high-ranking king, Harun al-Rashid, I'll spare you for time's sake what leads up to it, but basically a fisherman pulls a big chest out of the sea. And they open the chest and they find a young woman who's been cut to pieces and killed. And the king is outraged. And so he says to his right-hand man, Jafar, and you'll notice that in a lot of these stories, the right-hand man, what's called the vizier, it's the origin of the word wizard. The right-hand man is named Jafar a lot of times. And being the king's right-hand man is a rather dangerous occupation because he'll say things like, find who killed this woman inside of 3 days, or I'm killing you and your entire family. It's the way kings motivated people back then, I presume. But anyway, Jafar failed, and he was about to be hanged. The whole community heard about this, and the community gathered to see Jafar be hanged because he couldn't find who killed the woman. Word spread throughout the community, and as he was about to be hanged, a young man rushed forward and said, hang me instead, I'm the one who killed her. And the king's like, okay. And then an old man runs forward and says, the young man is innocent, hang me, I'm the one who killed her. And they start fighting, and the king's like, hang them both. And then the young man says, if you hang us both, you're killing an innocent person. I can prove it was me. And he explains the context, the chest in detail, proving that it was him. I killed her. And then he tells the story about how he traveled for weeks to get these very special apples that are not available locally at all. He traveled for weeks, brought them back. His wife wasn't feeling well. But it took him so long that by the time he got back, she wasn't as interested in the apples anymore, and she set them aside. And then later that day, he's out on the town, and he sees a cook a chef, with one of the beautiful apples that he had given his wife. And he's like, "Where'd you get that?" And the cook says, "Oh, my mistress gave it to me. Her husband traveled far away to get some beautiful apples for her." This cook does not know who he's talking to. "My mistress gave these to me, and her husband traveled far away." So he's infuriated. He goes to see his wife. She doesn't have the apple, so he kills her. Then he sees his son crying, and his son says, "I took an apple from Mom. But then when I was out in town with the apple, a cook took it from me, and I explained to the cook that you, my dad, traveled far away to get these apples to convince him not to take it from me, but he took it from me anyway." And then the cook, I'm skipping because I don't want it to get too confusing or long. So the cook learns that the husband traveled far to get the apple, so he tells this stranger the husband traveled really far. Now the husband's got a bee in his bonnet. He kills the wife. It turns out his son took it. "I killed my wife because of a lying cook. The caliph now orders Jafar to find the lying cook." He starts looking around, and he sees his daughter with the beautiful apple. And he's like, "Where'd you get the apple?" And she goes, "Our cook gave it to me." And Jafar's like, "What? My own cook is the cook?" So if you're a little bit confused, that's the nature of reality. So I won't, again, for time reasons, I won't take a lot, but the husband brought the apple to the wife. The son stole it. The son got out into the community. Jafar's cook stole it and gave it to Jafar's daughter. Jafar sees it with his daughter, learns that the cook took it, likes the cook. I'll spare you the details about why it wasn't as terrible as you might think what the cook did. He was giving it to, he was like, the son doesn't really care about the apple. Again, skipping details. Jafar's daughter would like this apple a lot more than this boy. I'm going to take it from him and give it to the girl. And so he did. And that set up this whole thing. The key takeaway is what you see happening isn't necessarily what you make it mean. All right, that's the three apples. This next story is a very famous story, the emptiness of extravagant wealth, and the idea that unbridled greed does not lead to happiness. You never get fulfilled. It's never enough, and you're going to die anyway. And that's really the theme of the story. You're all going to die anyway. It's not the most cheerful story in the world. You're going to die. Your children are going to die. Your children's children are going to die. All your friends are going to die. Everybody's dying. And no matter how much gold and silver and rubies and emerald, you get the idea. That's what this story is all about. The city of brass. It starts in Damascus, Syria. A king summons all his wisest people together, and they talk about ancient wisdom. And one of those present, Talib, talks about a land of black natives. Now, put your Middle Eastern hat on. The land of black natives is Africa. And I can't use the politically correct African American because these people are not African Americans. They're in Africa. This is thousands of years ago. But off the coast of this particular place in Africa, there's bottles. And these brass bottles are sealed with lead, bearing the seal, they also use the word signet, of Solomon. And the king says, I really want to see these bottles. The king being the king, I want some. That's what the city of brass is kind of about. I want some. And so, since he's the king, they organize a huge expedition. The story gets into all the details, but they organize this huge expedition with provisions, forces, troops, with weapons, and so on. And off they go to find this particular place where these brass bottles are. They finally, sparing you all the wise people they recruit and what goes on with this various journey, they go and they go and they go. Long, long journey. It would make a great movie. a great movie, all the visuals. Think Lord of the Rings when they're traveling through all these different places. They finally come to a rider, and he says, if you rub my hand, and I can't remember the way they rub his hand, but you're supposed to rub his hand a certain way, he'll point to the city of brass. And so they go there and they rub his hand the way they're supposed to rub it, and it points to a city of glass. I skipped the deserted palace that warns them about the depravity of extravagance. It's a very depressing place. But they do that before they get to the rider. But yeah, they find a palace of black stone decorated with all sorts of rich marble and gold and all that. And it says, all of this is for nothing. You're all gonna die. And they're depressed for a while, and then they pick themselves up and move on to the guy that points them towards the city of brass. And then they come to this guy, and again, I'm gonna be brief, but this guy is imprisoned in a pillar. And he's a scary dude. He's got eyes of burning coals. He's got an eye in his forehead. He's got 4 arms. He's buried up to his armpits in this pillar. He's got wings like a bird. He's one scary guy. And they're like, who are you, scary guy? And he says, I'm one of the kings of the Ifrit. My name is Dahish. And he tells about the war between genies and all these people that rebelled against Solomon, and how Solomon kicked butt and imprisoned them all. It's an acknowledgement of Judaism, is what there is to take away from that. Solomon rocks. Don't mess with Solomon. You'll end up imprisoned in a bottle, or you'll end up in one of these things. And this is the powerful guy that led thousands of genies and beasts and other creatures, men, and so on. And he got locked up by Solomon. So this acknowledgement of Solomon is a key part of the city of brass. They finally, he tells them all about the war. He points them to the city of brass. They find this city. The city is protected by extremely high walls. They see no gate. There's no gates that open. There's no way to enter. He sends a guy to walk all around it. Can't find it. Can't find any place that's open. Finally, the wise guy among them, well, they create a big tall ladder, and people go up the ladder and then leap to their death. They go up to the ladder, leap to their death. 12 men do this. And finally, one of the wise people go, the 13th probably isn't going to fare much better. But the super wise person that they recruited says, I've heard of stuff like this. I'll be okay. So they agree to let him go. He goes up and he doesn't succumb. It turns out, and this is also something you'll see in Western literature, where beautiful, lovely ladies with beautiful voices lure men to their death. Ever hear of that in any literature? Nah, that's never happened in Western literature. No. There's no such thing as the Odyssey or anything like that. Anyway, that happens in this city. If you go to the top, you're lured to jump off the tall wall. You think that there's water and you see beautiful maidens and you think that you're fine, that you can swim to them, but when you step off, you fall to your death because the wall is super, super high. The super wise guy is smarter than that. He prays, realizes what's going on, and he figures out a way to let them all in. And extravagance. And this has actually influenced a lot of some of the modern stuff that we see in TV shows of post-apocalypse type stuff. This is a city where everybody is still there, dead. They're mummified. So you see shops with all the shopkeepers and the patrons dead on the floor. You see all the goods, all the riches, all the extravagance, all the wealth, rubies and diamonds and gold and silver, and I could go on for a while. All the wealth that's inside of this city, and everybody's lying dead. And then there's inscriptions and sayings that they find telling them how all this wealth means nothing. It's transitory. Don't be seduced by the world's riches and think that that amounts to anything. You're all gonna die. That's what there is. And we all die. And then they come to this incredibly beautiful woman who's dead, but she's, what she has on her person could buy 5 houses. She's that wealthy. There's wealth all around her. And she says, take whatever you want, but don't take anything I'm wearing. How often have we heard something like that in ancient stories? Welcome to the horror movie. Welcome to the mansion. You can do anything you want in this mansion, but don't go behind the green door to the west wing. What's going to happen? You can do anything you want in this huge place, but don't open that chest over there. Leave that chest alone. Don't open the chest or it's bad. What do you think? Yeah, okay, how many pages do I have to read before they're opening the chest? And and not to criticize one of our most famous documents, but I mean, really, the Garden of Eden, you can have anything you want in the garden, but don't eat the apples on that tree. Whoever wrote that story wasn't really painting the Supreme Being as the sharpest knife on the shelf. I mean, what are we thinking here? All right. Well, anyway, she says that, and sure enough, one of the guys can't resist. The Talib guy, he can't resist. She's dead. What use does she have for all these luxurious garments? He starts to take off some of her jewels, and the statues that are next to her immediately become animated, and they kill him. They attack him and they kill him at once. The end of the story is extremely anticlimactic. They return back to where the black natives are. They approach the king who speaks Arabic and say, we really want these bottles. And you're like, well, then why did you do all this other? But anyway, they did what they did. They get their bottles. They return them to the king. The king opens the bottles, sees the smoke come out, and shout, repentance, repentance, because they still think Solomon's alive. And that's the end of the story, and you're kind of left with this empty taste, and that's the point. The wealth doesn't provide anything. All the treasure doesn't provide anything. Okay, the last story I've got is the power of karma and doing the right thing. Be a good person. Treat each other with kindness. Treat each other with respect. The golden rule, do as you would be done by. Karma works. God is paying attention to what you do. That's one of the themes of the Arabian Nights. And the example, the story that I've picked to show that is the two loaves. There was once a community where there's a word for it. What is it when people begging for stuff? There's a word for that, and I'm blanking on what the word is. But anyways, it was out of control. People were just completely out of control, soliciting people for gifts, in Bowling Green, we see it on, some of the intersections. You see the homeless, anything helps, God bless you. It was just completely out of control. The king had enough, and he goes, enough of this. Anybody gives anybody anything, I'm having their hands cut off. And he decrees this, and that becomes the law of the land. And shortly after that happens, this woman's walking along, and she's got some food, and this beggar begs her for food. And he begs her, and she says, no. If I give you any food, I'm going to get my hands cut off. And he says, in the name of God, please, I'm starving to death. I'm starving, please, just give me a little bit to eat. And his using the name of God touches her, which is another theme of the Arabian Nights. And so she gives him 2 loaves. It isn't days before the king hears about it, summons her before him in the appropriate whatever it is that they do, and has her hands cut off. Years pass, and the king asks his mother, says, I'm ready for another wife. And the mother says, I've got this beautiful woman in mind. She's absolutely gorgeous. She's delightful. She's got a great personality, but she has one major flaw. She doesn't have any hands. And he's like, that's a pretty major flaw, but I think I want to meet her anyway. And so he does, and he's so smitten with her and so taken with her that he marries her. And she bears him a son. He is so smitten with her that his other wives get jealous, and they convince him that she's been unfaithful and that the son is not his, that it belongs to another man. And the wives are convincing enough that he believes it, so he banishes her to the desert alone with her son. So alone with her son in the desert, and think of where this is and when this is. If you're alone in the desert in this place, you're done. You're not going to live. You're going to die, probably of thirst. If hunger doesn't take you out first, thirst will get you. Probably thirst. And sure enough, she's dying of thirst, and she comes to a stream. She finds a stream, which is kind of a miracle in and of itself. But as she bends over to drink, and she's drinking in the stream. Her son actually falls in, and the stream is strong enough that it washes him away, and she just breaks down, sobbing uncontrollably about her situation and what has happened to her in her life. How could this have happened to me? I'm a decent person, but now here I am dying in the desert, and my son just got washed away. And she's wailing in despair, and two men approach and hear her wailing. They hear her crying, and they approach and ask her what's going on, and she explains. And then they say to her, well, would you like your son restored to you? And she cries, yes. And they say a prayer, and her son appears right at her side. Just as good as if he'd not fallen in. He's perfectly fine. And they notice her arms. They look down and they see she doesn't have any hands. And they say, would you like your hands restored to you? And she cries, yes. And so they say a prayer, and then her arms grow new hands right in front of her. She just watches the hands grow. So, I mean, think of this as a movie. Hands grow better than the ones she had in the beginning. And so she's just crying with joy as she sees this happening. And then the men say, do you know who we are? And she shakes her head, crying. God only knows. And they smile to her and they say, we are the 2 loaves that you gave to the starving beggar. Shalom.
We do live on stories, don't we? Okay, it's time for our offertory. And our music group has a piece. I'm sorry, Eliza has a piece for us this morning. They get to sit this one out. Thank you for these gifts. May we use them wisely. Now, if you'll stand, we'll do our last hymn. Number 354 in the gray hymnal. We laugh, we cry. We cry, we live, we die, we
dance, we sing our song. We need to feel there's something here to which we can belong. We need to feel the freedom thus to have some time alone. But most of all, we need those friends we can call our very own. And we believe in life and in the strength of love. And we have found the need to be together. We have our hearts to give. We have our thoughts to receive. And we believe that sharing is an answer. A child is born among us and we feel a special glow. We see time's endless journey as we watch the baby grow. We thrill to hear imagination freely running wild. We dedicate our minds and hearts to the spirit of this child. And we believe in life and in the strength of love. And we have found the time to be together. And with the grace of age, we share the wonder of youth. And we believe that growing is an answer. Our lives are full of wonder and our time is very free. The death of one among us fills this world with pain and grief. But as we live, so shall we die. And when our lives are done, the memories we share with friends, they will linger on and on. And we believe in life and in the strength of love. And we have found a place to be together. And we have love to grow. We have the gift to believe that within our living is an answer. We seek elusive answers to the questions of this life. We seek to put an end to all the waste of human strife. We strive for truth, equality, and blessed peace of mind. And then we come together here to make the blood we find. And we believe in life and in the strength of love. And we have found the joy being together. And in our search for peace, may we finally see even to question truly is an answer.
There is no author to cite on this. The whole of the prophet's life can be explained by the single principle of following divine wisdom. God has created this world in such a way that every person here enjoys freedom. No one has the right to abolish the freedom of another. Thus, we have to manage other people's freedom rather than to attempt to abolish it. Islamic wisdom is therefore to carry on with your mission while managing the issues that arise on account of other people's freedom.
We now come to leave our friends online. We're glad you joined us, and we hope that you learned and enjoyed the message.